Hi, I'm James Horn, and I'm Creative Director at Pixel Toys Limited. We're a VR and mobile game developer based in the centre of the UK in leafy Leamington Spa, a creative hub for the UK games industry and also home to Codemasters, Playground Games and Ubisoft, amongst others. As a game studio, we're known most recently for Games Workshop games such as Warhammer 40,000 Freeblade, Age of Sigmar Realm War, and most recently, Warhammer 40,000 Battle Sister, which is available now on Oculus Quest and Rift. In addition, we've also made Drop Dead, a zombie narrative shooter that originated on Gear VR and has found great success on Quest over the last few years. Now, none of this, of course, sounds even remotely linked to theatre, so let me give you some of that side too. I trained in theatre and drama at Aberystwyth University in deepest Wales, an absolutely beautiful place which also has a history of pursuing creative, innovative theatre. Whilst there, I worked with some fantastic pioneering creatives such as Mike Pearson of Breathe Goff, Richard Downing of Human Zoo, and Dr. David Raby of Lurking Truth. What they have in common as theatre makers and what I saw in them was the breadth of theatre and how it can break through from the more stifling or traditional forms that can often be seen in the higher profile theatre that we see today in London or on Broadway. My work there concluded with the founding of Word Theatre, a small experimental theatre company that produced a series of devised pieces over a number of years across West Wales. Our largest performance was Word, a performative journey through the story of the Bible, soundtracked by big beat music, liberal use of angle grinders, and a lot of scaffolding poles. That sold out to sell out audiences across Wales and very much achieved what we set out for it to do. It was about innovative and new ways to express old ideas using what at the time was pretty high technology. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through my journey with theatre and games, jumping into XR as we go through and give you some of my thoughts on how I believe the two interrelate, the synergies that are there, and most importantly, how they can inform each other in their creative processes. To do this, I've grouped my thoughts into four main headlines that I'll explore in more detail as we go on. Those headlines are: theatre is spatial, theatre is interpersonal, theatre is refined, and theatre is. Okay, so let's fast forward. Career-wise, I worked for a time as an actor, and I did various bit parts in TV shows and bits of theatre, but eventually ended up changing careers and heading into video games. As mentioned previously, Leamington Spa is a hub for games development, so I joined Codemasters, working as an environment artist on Dirt. Later on, moving to Freestyle Games, where we made the amazing DJ Hero as part of Activision, before ultimately ending up at Pixel Toys. This is where my eyes were opened to the possibilities of theatre and games coming together, and it came via a Samsung phone strapped into a plastic holder. I joined the company just as they were beginning a project on Gear VR. It was creating a zombie shooter. Now, I actually find zombie shooters a little bit lazy and cliched, but what struck me as I put on that headset for the first time, even in a fairly rough prototype form with prototype code, was the sense of space. Immersion, yes, but also that depth, that sense of architecture. The relationship of you, the protagonist, the audience, to the content. And this is a key tenet of theatre. And a recognition of this is vital for creating compelling VR experiences. So what do I mean by this? Well, Peter Brook, the acclaimed theatre director, wrote in the opening lines of his seminal book, The Empty Space, in 1968, "I can take any empty space and call it a bare stage." The heart of theatre, the most basic unit, is a space for performance. Whether this is the amphitheatres of ancient Greece, the Commedia dell'arte performing in the piazzas of Tuscany, Shakespeare's great wooden O, the Globe in London, through the proscenium of the Victorian age, and then those paradigms being shattered in the 20th century by modernism and experimental theatre, things like theatre in the round, site-specific work. But one thing they all have in common is a physical defined space. a spatial relationship between the audience and the performers. So why does this matter for XR? And I'll use that term now rather than VR because this is true for augmented reality, mixed reality, spatial computing, and whatever other terms you like to use. They exist within a space. In the case of VR, it's a digital space that cuts out the real world and shuts it out, creates a new world. For augmented reality, it's a digital space that sits on top of and exists in relation to our real space. In the case of spatial computing, it's a digital space that interacts with our real world space. And this is a significant difference to flat screen or pancake formats, as they're often called, which are not. I, the user, am kept at a fixed distance through the window, and my presence is not relevant to the content. This is actually an ideal moment to bring another small part of my journey with theatre and digital technology out. Through 2019 into 2020, I had the pleasure of being one of 6 digital fellows working with the Royal Shakespeare Company and Magic Leap, plus some fantastic partners in i2 Media at Goldsmiths and the University of Portsmouth. We were researching how digital technology could transform theatre and performance going into the future and the relationship of audiences to digital technology. Over the course of the year, I investigated the potential of Magic Leap, working with the other fellows to create an interactive dining experience based on A Midsummer Night's Dream and featuring live actors, projection mapping, and the Magic Leap. We were preparing to present this work, which is titled Where Once We, at South by Southwest in March 2020. And I think I probably don't need to sum up ultimately what happened to those performances, as sadly global events overtook things. But I'll share some elements and learnings from this as we go along. Any piece of theatre considers the space that it will take place in and defines it for its own purposes. The needs of the drama are reflected in this. A stage designer working with the director will spend a great deal of time during the design phase of theatre considering the movement and the relationships between the audience and the performers. Proximity can heighten threat or intimacy. Space and isolation can reinforce a sense of loneliness. A busy, ever-moving stage can illustrate a chaotic drama. This is very important for how we create our XR experiences too. We need to design them for space. An example of this was, from my experience, was a devised theatre piece I worked on some years ago called Genet, directed by Judith Aston. As part of the show, based on the life of the anarchist poet Jean Genet, who we can see in the centre there, we wanted to create the feel of a descent into madness. The audience were positioned around the room, and an increasing number of actors moved around the space, surrounding them, moving even between them. The action, music, and sounds were getting less and less focused on single actors and individual performances and became more and more chaotic around the audience members as the madness built. Certainly wasn't a comfortable experience for the audience. It was certainly memorable and striking. And this is very important for how we create our XR experiences too. We need to design them for space. For XR then, we need an awareness of space and spatial relationships. This is both the actual physical space that the experience takes place within. In the case of augmented reality, for example, we need to author an experience that is flexible to user space, yet is also defined and controlled. How do we restrict where the user can place the experience? And then how can we take advantage of this? We need to consider those usage cases. Where will the experience likely be? What are the commonalities? Where in the world will this be? Is it local or is it global? A living room in Australia is a very different place from one in the UK in terms of space. Likewise, the US. And ultimately, what are the spatial relationships that are core to your audience? When we began developing the Dream Magic Leap RSC project in 2019, we came to realize that this ambiguity about space was a huge opportunity, but also a huge challenge. In the case of Magic Leap, the headset can see and can scan the world. And this is absolutely amazing. But is it actually aware of what the world is? And thus, can it respond to it? The engineers at Magic Leap are working hard to add this functionality into the SDK. This is object semantics. And that is ultimately the code understanding the meaning of something, which is actually a step further than computer vision. So when I scan a chair or a table, the system knows not only that that shape is likely a table or a chair, but what a table or chair represents or is used for. And then how does our authored content relate to that? For more information, there are some really great videos from Magic Leap out there, including a very comprehensive breakdown of Lumin OS perception by Jean-Yves Bouguet and David Molyneux, which is well worth checking out. So what do I mean by this? It's talking about spatial awareness and performance, and why would this be useful? This again circles back to theatre and acting. An actor performing within a space is aware of and understands the space in which they act. By means of what are commonly referred to as physical actions, and we've got a great quote here from Konstantin Stanislavski, the great theorist and actor. In every physical action, unless it is purely mechanical, there is concealed some inner action, some feelings. This is how the two levels of life in a part are created. The inner, the things going on within, and the outer, the things we're presenting. They are intertwined. A common purpose brings them together and reinforces the unbreakable bond. That actor performs within a space. They respond to that space. This could be the simple action of leaning on the back of the chair whilst talking. It could be the subconscious coming through as you use a prop to stem and define the dramatic action. In an XR experience, that activity, when related to a real-world space, can be incredibly compelling. At a very basic level, playing Dr. Broadborts on Magic Leap for one of the first times in my home, and when facing the enemies, it took me a moment to realize that the enemies were both behind my sofa, using it as cover, and also shooting around some of the objects in my room. These characters were in my space, and actually, at that moment, the experience becomes much more profound. This content is not being projected on my world, but rather is within my world, and within my reality. It then becomes a form of theatre. Anthony Artaud was a visionary playwright and theorist, and in 1938 actually coined the phrase virtual reality for the first time. In this quote, he talks about how alchemists create gold, and that within the theatre, when characters, object, images come together in the theatre, it becomes a virtual reality. And that's where the really amazing stuff is. The theatre performance is a virtual reality. The XR experience is a virtual reality. We create immersive realities for our audiences. So these same spatial relationships are hugely important when developing a virtual reality game experience, of course. Recently, we launched Warhammer 40,000 Battle System on Oculus Quest, as mentioned before. And one thing within that Warhammer world is the sense of scale and space that we wanted to create. We wanted to have soaring cathedrals. We wanted to have that sense of scale that the brand carries with it, these huge, brutalist concrete structures, oversized people, tanks, weaponry. It's really a striking thing when you first experience a space marine spatially in relation to you in VR. Games Workshop, who made the franchise, even questioned whether the scale was correct as they stood beside this 8.5-foot tall marine for the first time in VR. So in this sense, we designed our environments and our gameplay to maximize the theatre of our VR experience. Now, the core narrative within our game is between the player, another battle sister called Sister Rosalina, and a Primaris space marine called Julius. They're played by the fantastic Victoria and Obi that you can see here. Within the game, we have a motion captured narrative. And I was really keen for those moments that you have where you're telling a story between these three characters, that you would have that spatial intimacy that you get when you're in a theatre. This is particularly interesting with a Space Marine who's 8.5 foot tall. The amazing thing about telling a story in this way is that there is a sense of presence that you as an audience member get when you're standing close to these actors who are responding to you, looking at you, and each other. In order to do this, we had to treat the motion capture shoot like a theatre experience. I directed the shoot from the point of view of the virtual audience member. So we get that connection, those little looks between characters, that intimacy. This, for me, was one of the reasons why I was so excited about virtual reality. We're telling stories from and showing actors' performances in this very personal way. We configure the space, the way we block out that action in exactly the same way as we would in the theatre. Block like theatre. We're trying to capture the nuance of performance. And ultimately, we're configuring the space to do that. And this is where we cross over from the theatre is spatial into theatre is interpersonal. Because it's about space, but it's also about people and the relationship between people and that contact. Now, obviously, I know there are lots of fantastic virtual and augmented reality works which have no figurative or human elements within them. But there is definitely something special about meeting human beings within a virtual space. You can see the popularity of things like VR chat and the underpresence performance of The Tempest, which brought live theatre into virtual reality. Likewise, the RSC's Dream project earlier this year that streamed live mocap to huge audiences. Perhaps this is magnified by the situation we've been in over the last year and a half under lockdowns, but just meeting people digitally or virtually still has a power. Something that's also important to take from this interpersonal theatre is the contact that takes place between an audience and an actor. If you watch a recording of a live piece of theatre on TV, it's often somehow a drier, less exciting experience, particularly if filmed before an empty house. Add an audience and that energy rises. Be there in person and it's an entirely different experience. Partly this is because of the shared experience you have with other audience members, that unique moment in time shared with a select few, but also because the audience completes the experience. Shown here are images from King John, fantastic performances that played at the Swan Theatre in Stratford in 2019-2020. The excitement of the audience in this show was so important to two really key scenes within the play. There was a boxing match that ranged across the stage. The pugilists were even falling into the crowd at times as the performance almost became a sporting event. The messy match taking place. Then again, later, there's a wedding that descends into a real food fight where the audience roars with laughter whilst trying to avoid being hit by flying cakes and hot dogs. The actors play to the crowd. They catch their eyes. They respond to their responses. They feed on the energy of an audience. And this is what we're missing by not having live events at the moment. And this can be the same with our XR experiences. In Battle Sister, we had our mocap, but we intentionally broke our mocap to introduce elements of this into our dramatic action. We know the player is wearing a 6DoF helmet, Oculus Quest, Oculus Rift, and we'll be moving around the scene as our actors talk. So what we did was we layered in responses predominantly through look-ats, and they make a huge difference to the feeling of immersion within that scene. We have responsive gestures where characters will hand the player items at certain parts within the storyline. And it feels great to reach out and take that from a character who's reaching out to where you are. We'd love to take this further, obviously, layering in more responsive systems, putting in alternative takes and captures for responses to different ways the main player can respond. And what I'd say is it's really great to consider this kind of thing for impactful moments. You don't have to put it everywhere, but for those moments where you need that contact, those key parts of the drama, it's worth doing. However, I would say it is quite expensive to develop. Adding any of those systems in and trying to do them in a way that's subtle and looks natural is quite hard. It's definitely a cross-discipline effort. You need your coders, you need your narrative designers, and you definitely need your animators in there as well, all to try and get that subtlety and to make sure that those systems are finely tuned to where the player is looking. And ultimately, there are diminishing returns as well. So I'd say keep it for those impactful moments, but the more responsiveness we can get to player position, the better. Now, whilst working on the Magic Leap RSC Fellowship year, I did a series of experiments using motion capture to convey a piece of Shakespeare, the Duke of Clarence's speech from Richard III. And I found that the sort of filmic motion capture performance didn't really work when placed into an XR environment, in this case, the Magic Leap. Partially, this was the hardware. The light field technology is fairly early in the Magic Leap one, which means that the subtler nuances are captured are lost. Likewise, a limited field of view on the headset meant that full-size humans didn't really fit very well in the frame. And this led to the experience becoming more of a traditional tabletop look, shrinking down the performance so it can be viewed in full. But what this required was for the actor to play to the crowd, giving a much bigger performance that you can see here on the lovely Unity robot. The RSC's own 7 Ages of Man also shows this in a very refined way. So if you're designing your experience theatrically with that awareness of space and the power of those interpersonal connections, you can also make the user work a bit to see that. So what I mean by that is framing the action so that the player is encouraged to look around, interact, and interrogate the performance, to engage. If we look at the scene from partway through Battle System, we can see the player's view of Malachi. He's our resident inquisitor. A traditional cutscene would frame the actors, so we would catch all of their performances in 1 or 2 shots, depending on the camera angle. There can be a tendency for us to do this in XR2, to frame all of that action right in front of where the player or the user is looking. However, in XR, we can stage the action around the player. So as the action unfolds, they look left, they look right, they engage with the action. This is certainly a more engrossing experience and can lead to an involvement that is ultimately more memorable. On a practical note, I'd say that if you want to do this, you need to rehearse with your actors. And what I'd say is, we book in our shoots for motion capture, and then we kind of work back from there. Book in more rehearsal time with your actors and get them as involved as possible. You need to build a company of actors, help them to understand what the game's going to be, help them to understand the nuances of their individual characters, get them their script as far in advance as possible. Share it with them, share all the details you can, concept art, and you'll have some actors who are much more engaged with the piece that you're creating. Making them aware of where their audience is going to be is also crucial. One thing we found when we were working with Victoria and Obi is that working towards a virtual reality camera is much harder because the player can be wherever they are. And so we had to really target down where we want the player to be. Listen to your actors as well. Theatre productions are collaborations and not dictatorships, and actors are professionals and have really good insights into how a drama can unfold. I would encourage people to bring along your lead animator to any motion capture shoots that you're doing to watch that data capture and work with the team. And some of these are slightly more common sense within motion capture, but blocking your environments and using accurate blocking models makes a huge difference. And making sure your props have got accurate grip points means that extra step of accuracy will save you a whole load in the long run. And what I'd also say is, as you're rehearsing, refine your action. don't be afraid to cut. Don't be afraid to cut out all that fat and flab that's sitting within those performances. The great thing about that last note is that it nicely segues into my next headline, that theatre is refined. Now, of course, most XR experiences these days are the result of a great deal of thought, time, and effort. But one thing that struck me about theatre as I worked with the RSC over the course of the year was the stages and levels of concerted refinement that took place. I was reflecting on the difference between what in games and films we would call the pre-production and production processes and theatrical rehearsal processes. Now, on the surface, these two sets of processes can seem superficially similar, but there are quite significant differences in how they are structured. So I'm going to share some experiences I've had in rehearsals in the past and give you some examples. Now, it's worth saying I'm talking here about my experiences of theatrical process. There are many, and they can be very short, sometimes too short, and can also be entirely different. But usually there is somebody with an idea of what they want to present. Often this is embedded in a script, a story to be told, staged or revived. In theatre, text is often the anchor that holds the production together, a backbone or an armature which the different elements can be hung off. If we're actually honest, do our XR experiences have that backbone, that anchor? I've been involved in many games where the vision, the central idea of the game still isn't truly resolved, even at launch. And if you're still finding the core, the truth, the vision of that game right to the end of production, then your development team is swirling around without a backbone. You can see here a typical theatre process. This can be anywhere from 1 year to possibly even to 5 years long, with a long script development process, a design stage where staging, lighting, visual design is developed. Casting can be a year before, music composed alongside that as well. And then your visual graphic design is often chosen much long before the rest of the production is developed. It's an elongated experimental period, and there's loads of really interesting opportunities for ideas to be developed, lots of discussion. Dramaturgy as well is in there, which is about editing the drama. With Where Once We, which was the ultimate aim for our Magic Leap RSC event, we followed this pattern, not with that length of duration, but it was a cross-discipline creative process with a real freedom to ideate. We came up with loads of ideas, loads of images, throwing lots of things around. We explored the text together, reading the whole play aloud several times, and just listening to the changes that the spoken text brought. We had space. We had time to immerse ourselves in the project. We looked at loads of different images related to classical Shakespeare, to old traditions of Warwickshire, what does a forest mean, and other things like that. As we progressed, we created a things we know to be true document to begin to cement some of these ideas down. And this is actually crucial for a design process, being able to know when to lock ideas down and to begin to create the foundations upon which your creative project is going to be built. We had a lot of unknowns relating to budget, performance dates, technical support for app development. So we focused on elements we could control. And this was a fantastic creative process. Now, at a certain point, usually dictated by budget and release date, a theatre company will move into actual rehearsal. And this is the meat of theatre making. Actors, directors, producers, and other creatives in a common space working on the production. Theatre is rarely a pure dictatorship, and I do choose my words carefully there. Truly successful theatre empowers the actors and creatives, so the process is truly collaborative. The production is discovered through the process of rehearsal. It is continually refined in alignment with the overall vision of the piece. What there often is there is an intense focus and an honesty there. And actually, I think that's really something we need to value and we need to encourage within our games as well. And often it's not too late to amend. For Where Once We actually had a very short rehearsal time as we pulled together the technical aspects of the Magic Leap experience, the music, the physical props. These physical props featured projection mapping, small physical details that audiences could interact with. And it was all due to be set within a seedy bar in Texas during the South by Southwest Festival. During rehearsals in Stratford, and following discussions with a wide range of test audiences, we heavily reworked sections of narrative to tighten the experience and to make the narrative more compelling. This was really difficult and actually controversial amongst us as a group. Likewise, certain technical elements just didn't work so well in Magic Leap, and so we revised the conclusion of the piece, the ultimate end point, simplifying and streamlining the ending. Ultimately, the piece we prepared was more accessible and more practical than our earlier version and was ready for first night, a night that sadly never came to be. And that's the presentation. That's the final stage of the process. I've grouped Tech Week into here. This is talking about theatre, where it's that really important moment, like we said before, where it's the coming together of all those elements. It's very similar to the final QA phase where all that you have within game dev, where all the nasty bugs come out. And lighting, costumes, sets, music will all be in place. And there's actually a very fast period of evolution that takes place then. In theatre, the performance can still be developing at this stage, responding to the moment. Play isn't even final at this stage, even after first night. The great power of theatre is that it's unique every night, a special occasion every performance. Performers are working with the audience. So, relating this back then to game dev and XR dev, we have our idea, and usually never enough time for anything. And never enough budget. But we should learn from theatre about the design process. That pre-production shouldn't rush too fast to prototype. Do we actually give our creatives time and space to actually think about ideas, to play with crazy notions, to experiment? We should elongate this process, allowing time for ideas to gestate, trusting creatives to be creative. If we have narrative elements, then we need to bring our writers in earlier than we do. We need to get them to engage with the earlier stages of production so that their work is fully integrated into the whole. Involving cast earlier as well pays huge dividends. Performers' experiences can really help shape a piece of drama, particularly if we employ someone like Victoria, like we did on Battle Sister, who's done so much games work before. Her experience was so valuable to us as we developed. Ultimately, this process should be about refining and defining a vision for the project that can stand up to argument and scrutiny. And this means having those difficult conversations and working through the conflicts. A solid vision will be worth that pain in later development, worth that pain in data development. So how do we define a shared vision? Well, ultimately, it requires a great deal of negotiation and discussion between all the relevant stakeholders and should be laid out and communicated to and with the team really clearly. I mean, this becomes the test that the entire project, this becomes the test point where we can test our entire project against, and it's very important during the later production. It's very important to form a company of people that trust one another. Now, there are many ways to do this, of course, but ensuring that there is a safe space for people to express ideas without them getting immediately shot down is vital. Many theatre companies spend a lot of early rehearsal time just getting to know each other, socialising, learning about each other's backgrounds. It makes them a more cohesive and more creative unit, and ultimately a unit that trusts itself. With ideas, keeping them nebulous to begin with, and then beginning to narrow them later. It makes a huge, it can be really, really helpful. Things like Miro boards are really great for this. Feeding in the advice of specialists, writers, composers, actors to help develop your vision. And then ultimately, your directors must direct, whether you've got one director or a series of directors in different disciplines. Your directors need to take you through, because groupthink rarely arrives at a clean and coherent whole. Testing the idea with your friends, family, market research as well is really a great thing to do. All feedback is good, even the negative stuff. You just need to work out how to interpret that. And ultimately, you need to take risks. You need to be creative in that when you're making your vision. So once we move through into full production, this is the meat of game dev, where we actually make the thing. Like a theatre rehearsal, this should be a group of professionals enabling each other and working collaboratively towards that shared vision, held aloft usually by the director. This could be a longer period of time, and so we need to make sure that we've got enough stamina for that. And we need to remember to keep refining as we go forward. Sometimes it can feel like a slog just to get everything over the line. But that's fine. We're often still answering pre-production questions, and that actually is a problem. We should try and stamp out any of those pre-production questions, which we should have answered way back in pre-prod. Now, change will, of course, be needed as we're doing this, but we should try and make this subtractive change rather than additive. Let's try and cut things out. Let's try and tighten up the experience rather than bloating it. User testing as well can be really helpful, as mentioned in the previous, if it's done right and if you've got somebody who can actually be interpreting that data for you. So the director needs to make time to review the work as it progresses. And this importance of the review to this process is really, really key. Production is a long slog, and so having those regular moments of review and retrospective is vital to make a compelling experiences. Agile can help with this, although there are other ways you can do it. You need to make decisions, and that's ultimately that's the director's job, but individually we need to make decisions as a dev team, not wallow around in indecision at this stage. That was our pre-production process where we were wallowing. Now we're making decisions. But it's rarely too late to change your mind either. Keep cutting things if you need to. Most plays are flabby, most games are flabby. Let's tighten it up as we keep going. So as we come to release and the joy of those final few weeks or months of QA where all those bugs start to come out, we need to still consider and think about refinement. Things can still be cut, although no adding, please. Remember that there's a content lock. And we should have a plan for post-launch. In this ever-connected age, the potential to evolve an XR experience post-launch is actually really huge. But we do need to allocate budget to allow for that. Think about how long you want to support your experience post-first launch and have a plan for how you'll measure data to inform that process. In larger companies, you'll be blessed with data analysts, but for smaller XR devs, who'll do this? How will you evaluate that feedback and feed that back into the development process? This is exactly the same process as you would do in a theatre production. And we need to listen to those reviews. And so I come to my last main headline: theatre is. So what do I mean by this? Well, ultimately, theatre is confident, it's brash, it's political, it's resilient, it's fun, it's challenging, it's cheap, it's expensive, it's unafraid of risks, it's dangerous, it's exciting, it's nuanced, but it's also rough. It's resourceful, it's ever-changing, it's human, it's now, it's unapologetic, it's expressive, it's interactive, it's surprising, loud, a community, a place to create. It's cutting edge, it's redefining itself every day. It's fresh, it's immediate, it's relevant, it's powerful. A lot of words, I know, but we need to take that from theatre. Theatre doesn't try and defend itself, it just is. It's all of those things at once. The playwright Howard Barker says, the weakness of contemporary theatre is its fear of the audience, the horror that they may not understand the scene, that they may lose the thread of the narrative, that we shall be accused of elitism if meaning becomes obscure. this cripples the theatre with his false democracy. He's talking about boring theatre, but what he's loving is exciting theatre. So what about us? Well, with our XR experiences, we need to be confident in what we make. We need to have that theatre confidence. We don't need to defend what we're building, whether it's AR, whether it's spatial computing, whether it's VR. We need to take risks and be dangerous. This is an exciting time for this medium. We've got loads of really creative new things every day, new ways of using technology, new ways of interacting. We need to trust our audience to engage with what we create. Ultimately, we don't necessarily have loads of money, so we need to be resourceful and we need to find new ways to solve problems. And one way of doing that is we need to be a community that supports one another and is open. We need to share those learnings with each other, build each other up. So in summary, looking back through what we've been talking about, theatre is spatial. We design it for our spaces. We need to author the experiences that we make to maximize immersion. We need to stage our action within defined spaces. We need to embrace the theatre of the interpersonal, understand the relationship of your project to the audience. We need to find that human contact. We need to build responsive systems so that your audiences know that they're there. We need to be collaborative with our creatives. Theatre is refined, so we need to define that vision. We need to build our company of actors, our company of creatives, and then we need to review and we need to direct our work. And ultimately, theatre is, we need to be confident. We need to be a community. We need to take risks, and ultimately, we need to create. Thank you so much for listening. Pixel Toys is hiring. I'm always happy to talk through any of the things that we've been talking about today. You can find my Twitter handle just there and my emails there as well. So I hope you've enjoyed the talk. And if anyone's got any questions, I'm really happy to answer.